Welcome to another episode of MMA Vision Analysis. This one, I'm here to talk about Dan Hooker and the possibility of Dan Hooker facing Conor McGregor, or at least Dan Hooker expressing his interest in facing a Conor McGregor. But before getting into this video, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification to get all it is that is new from this channel, your channel, the one and only MMA Vision Analysis. Dan Hooker at this point has faced the who's who in that lightweight division, but Dan Hooker, being relatively young age, had the time and the willpower alongside time to bring him back top of division again, or at least in terms of talks. A couple of wins, and we're talking about Dan Hooker in super fights. Obviously, his last opponent, Matthews Gamrot, was a respectable opponent. Personally, we thought that, I think as a collective, that Matthews Gamrot was one of those guys that was going to give Islam Makhachev a difficult time. Unfortunately for Gamrot, fell short to a Dan Hooker. I think there was a bit of injustice done there for Matthews Gamrot, just because sheer numbers favored him in that fight against Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker was the flashier fighters with more tattoos. I think that had a lot to do with the decision. In all honesty, I expressed my frustration with decisions at times. I believe that it's time for this sport, the UFC specifically, to implement some sort of AI scoring system, because human error is, I think, putting guys' career at a halt due to misjudging fights. That being said, I have to give credit to Dan Hooker. He did look excellent. His punches did look like they had more pops on them. But ultimately, I believe, or part of me at least believes, that Matthews Gamrot was robbed the night of the fight against Dan Hooker. Nonetheless, Dan Hooker 2 in a row, I believe, at this point. As I said, he has fell short to some top contenders, the likes of Chandler, the likes of Poirier. But now, 2 wins in a row, especially his last one was a respectable win against a Matthews Gamrot. Now we're talking about Dan Hooker. At least Dan Hooker's talking about himself being in super fights. The likes of a bout against Max Holloway for a BMF title. Super fight, the likes of him facing Conor McGregor, which is the fight that I'm here to talk about specifically. Dan Hooker, Conor McGregor, does this fight really have a chance of becoming reality? In all honesty, every single time Conor McGregor gets mentioned at this point, I think us as UFC fans, just MMA fans, combat sports fans collectively, have a lot of doubts in terms of this guy moving forward. In all honesty, I think Conor's best days are behind him. Even if he was to come back, it's gonna hype us up. We're gonna get super hyped up. But I don't think the performance is going to be there from Conor. With all respect to the Notorious One, somebody who's transformed the sport from one level to the other. But I have to be honest, I have doubts that Conor McGregor, even if he was to step foot back in the octagon, that he's going to impress. It's just, I don't think that's going to be the case. I could be wrong, of course. If he was to step foot back in the octagon, we had a guy in the name of Chandler who's wasted the best part of 2 years waiting on the guy. So I don't think how a Dan Hooker could, cut the line and get to Conor first. That would not make sense. Also, I think stylistically, Dan Hooker fight is a tougher fight. Not saying that a Chandler fight is an easier fight, but I just don't. Both fights are very difficult for Conor, in all honesty. I think Conor, if he was to come back, probably wants to be lined up against a guy probably in the name of Tony Ferguson, which he has expressed interest in facing Tony Ferguson in the past. He's actually talked about it. I've actually said it before. If Tony was his opponent the night of UFC 303, I don't think that Conor would have pulled out of that fight. But I just don't see Conor facing the likes of Chandler or Dan Hooker. In all honesty, would these fights be fun to watch? Absolutely. It would also make a very good payday for both fighters. Conor's aware of that, and Conor's no dummy. If you made it this far, I appreciate you for sticking around. Please let me know what you think in the comments and like, subscribe for more.